We're all familiar with the Fiat 500 city car and its cutesy little looks and extreme popularity. But times are changing, even for small cars, and that means that this latest Fiat 500 is a hybrid. The good news for Fiat 500 fans is that the hybrid is by and large identical to the car that you know and love. It retains those really compact proportions, that sort of bubble car soft silhouette, and of course those great big round headlights that give it just so much character in comparison to a lot of other vehicles on the road. People really do fall in love with the way this car looks. So this specific example is a launch edition hybrid, and that means that it comes with a few extras that you don't get on the regular car. Things like this green paint, some really interesting materials for the seats that are actually made out of recycled plastics from the oceans, some really smart 16-inch alloy wheels which I think really complement that green paint, and some additional chromed details. And if you love dropping the top on a sunny day, launch edition cars can also be had as 500Cs. Now, if it's predominantly business as usual on the outside, that means most of these changes have to be going on beneath the wrapper, and that's very true. There's an all-new mild hybrid drivetrain, and things kick off with a 3-cylinder naturally aspirated engine beneath the bonnet, which is quite a rare thing in a small city car these days, as we live in the world of turbocharging. Now, that is supported by a 12-volt starter motor and an 11 amp-hour battery, so actually in the grand scheme of hybrids, this is a very mild hybrid. That battery only really serves to help supplement the engine. It can't run on electricity alone, you can't plug it in, and the overall output is only about 70 brake horsepower from this car, with this drivetrain actually replacing the 1.2 litre engine option you could have previously. Fiat claims there's actually a 20% increase in efficiency with this car, and I have to say, by and large, driving it in mixed conditions this week, yeah, we've been getting around 50 miles to the gallon, which hasn't been too bad at all. But what I will say is, because it's a small battery, it depletes very quickly, and how much effectiveness it's having on the overall package I think is questionable. It doesn't really provide that additional torque, so I find myself staring through this manual gearbox quite a lot, revving the engine quite hard to make progress in any meaningful manner. Now, of course, it's a city car. It's designed for an urban environment, stop-start traffic, and there's actually a feature that allows you to slip it into neutral at speeds of up to 18 miles per hour, with the battery keeping all of the other electrics alive. Clearly it has some effect, but just how great an effect I think is what's in question. I wonder whether Fiat have done this more to meet emissions regulations than really go wholeheartedly into the hybrid foray. Okay, so on the motorway, its 70 brake horsepower doesn't really get you anywhere in a hurry, and its 0 to 62 mile per hour time of 14 seconds on faster roads is somewhat agonising. But how about around town? Because that's really where this thing is designed to live. And I have to say, this compact package is ideal. I think it's probably one of the smallest new cars you can buy today, and that makes it super easy to park. You've got this button here to activate a city mode that makes the steering really light. The fact that you can almost touch the back window from the driver's seat just means those compact proportions make life really, really easy. And I can see why, if you live in a congested environment, a Fiat 500 makes a lot of sense. In fact, it makes a lot of sense for most people. You see people like this driving a big SUV, there's one person in it. And so maybe more compact cars are the future. Generally speaking, I think this car has a great platform. It did 13 years ago when it first arrived. You'll find that it's got this little sense of agility because of the fast steering rack and the fact that it's got such a short wheelbase. It'll change direction quite nicely. The steering is actually nice and precise as well, which is something that you might find is a bit of a surprise for a city car. But there's a bit of a lack of feel, and the fact that the gearbox is just so loose and imprecise means that you don't have that connection whilst driving. I also think the seating position's way off. It's been something since the Fiat 500 first arrived, and also something that actually translated into the faster R baths. You just sit a bit too high, and the fact that the steering doesn't have any reach adjustment means you have to sit further forwards and you're sort of on top of the pedals. Not ideal ergonomically speaking. Obviously it's a small car, not a limousine, so you'll fit 2 children in the back no problem, but as they start to grow a bit bigger, or certainly if you want adults, it's more for short journeys only. It does get a bit cramped back there. Boot space is actually not too bad. The boot opening's pretty big. There's a bit of a load lip to lift shopping over, but once you get the boot open, there's
185 litres of boot space on offer.
Well, I think the interior of the Fiat 500 has actually aged pretty well. It still looks quite modern in here with this contrasting fascia, 500 logos and sort of throwback retro door handles and things. Visually, I think it still looks great, but to the touch, there's so much hard plastic in this car. And for £17,000, I expect something better than a 7-inch infotainment system with questionable ergonomics. It's Fiat's Uconnect system. It's just a bit clunky, a bit difficult to use on the move, and actually a little bit sluggish as well. The saving grace of this infotainment system really is that you can plug in your iPhone and use Apple CarPlay, which is a much easier, straightforward and very visual system to use. And of course, if you're familiar with a smartphone in any way, shape or form, it's second nature. And generally the build quality in here is just a bit subpar for 2020. When we're so used to having plush materials on the dashboard, everything is hard plastics, and there's a few little squeaks and rattles in this car, and it's only done less than 3,000 miles. It just makes me think that maybe the Fiat 500 in this guise has had its day. Of course, the all-new Fiat 500e, that's the real new car for Fiat. That is actually the new Fiat 500. This is more of a stopgap, I think, for Fiat. And because the 500 is such a big money maker, I think there's a degree of Fiat worrying about putting this car off sale before the big uptake of electric vehicles. Now, don't get me wrong, I totally see why there are so many Fiat 500s out there and why people go out there and buy them. You know, they're really characterful. It's hard not to love those great big doughy eyes on the front of it. It's nice to have something a bit more unique than the more generic cars out there on the road. And the customization options are pretty good on it as well, so you can really make it your own. And there's some very attractive finance offers on these cars. But sadly, I think the bottom line for this Fiat 500 hybrid is that it's a bit too expensive for a car that's actually been on sale for quite a long time. And ultimately, the game has moved on. It's sort of fallen behind the times. This hybrid is a good effort to help boost the economy of the car and lower emissions, and I'm sure people will value that as a tax incentive at the end of the day. And, you know, less tailpipe emissions is a good thing. However, as a city car, in comparison to its competitors at this price point, I think there are better options out there. Now, this being the most expensive launch edition model, the value for money proposition is very much in question. But this drivetrain is rolling out across the Fiat 500 range as mentioned. That means a pop model can be had for about £13,000, which is much more reasonable. Though I do think you have to look at some other alternatives, maybe even something from Hyundai. The i10's very good. Maybe not quite as characterful. But if you set your heart on a Fiat 500, you're probably going to go and buy a Fiat 500. There's nothing anyone can do or say about that. And in that regard, the hybrid model is a good thing. It's a little kinder to the world around it.
Head to YesAuto.com for the latest car news and reviews, and don't forget to check us out on social media. We're in all the usual places such as Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Simply search for YesAuto.